What would happen if the Earth processed nitrogen and sulfur through cycles? How would the flora thrive? And what would they do to continue to survive? Are we invasive enough to not let them thrive? This is what E.A.F, and here's what flora experienced through nitrogen and sulfur cycles.
Before we tackle what flora experienced through nitrogen-sulfur cycles, let us first find out what those cycles are for and why they are important to flora.
The nitrogen cycle is a process of biogeochemical activity that converts nitrogen into a multitude of different forms, from the atmosphere to the ground and even through living organisms. The cycle describes certain phenomena within nitrogen. The cycle itself has 5 steps which involve several processes. Firstly, nitrogen fixation. It is the initial step of the nitrogen cycle. Here, atmospheric nitrogen, or N2, which is available in its inert form, is converted into usable ammonia. Secondly, nitrification. In this process, the ammonia is converted into nitrate by the presence of bacteria in the soil. Thirdly, assimilation. Plants take in the nitrogen compound from the soil with the help of their roots. Fourthly, ammonification. Decomposers convert the organic nitrogen to ammonia. Fifth and finally is dentification, a process in which the nitrogens from the soil make their way back to the atmosphere by converting nitrate into gaseous nitrogen. The nitrogen cycle is important for a number of reasons. Nitrogen is the main component when it comes to protein synthesis and production due to its function as a nitrogenous compound. In addition to this, nitrogen also helps enrich the soil, making it more fertile and suitable for plants and flora alike.
The sulfur cycle is a description of sulfur's transit through geosphere and biosphere. Like nitrogen cycle, the sulfur cycle also has 5 steps. First, sulfur dioxide emissions. It is the conversion of sulfur to dimethyl sulfide to sulfur dioxide to sulfates as it reaches the atmosphere. Natural processes like volcanic eruptions also play an essential role in increasing the SO2 concentration in the atmosphere. Second, plants uptake. Sulfur is taken up by plants and microbes after it reaches the terrestrial and aquatic biospheres. Third, waste products and decomposition. The sulfur in the food chain then undergoes the decomposition process, converting the sulfate into sulfides so that they can be returned to the atmosphere. Fourth, wet and dry deposition. It is where sulfur can either be precipitated or deposited on the earth. Fifth, weathering. The sulfate and sulfide particles absorbed by the soil are washed away during the weathering of coastal rocks. What makes sulfur cycle important to flora is that sulfur is required for the formation of chlorophyll, which is why deficient plants appear yellow. Sulfur is a vital plant nutrient that, despite its classification as a secondary nutrient, is required for plants to complete their life cycle, and it also plays an important role in nitrogen metabolism.
Now that we know what nitrogen and sulfur cycles are for, let's next find out how they affect the flora around us.
To predetermine the effects of these situations, you can use the Le Chatelier's principle. Le Chatelier's principle states that if a dynamic equilibrium is disturbed by changing the condition, the position of equilibrium shifts to counteract the changes to re-establish an equilibrium. We can see this result by what we call the contact process. This explains the reason for the conditions used in process by considering the effect of proportions, temperatures, pressure, and catalyst on the composition of the equilibrium mixture, the rate of the reaction, and the economics of the process. An application of this is how acid rain can affect flora, where it can cause dead or dying trees. The trees are then less able to absorb sunlight and to withstand freezing temperatures. Acid rain also leaches aluminum from the soil. That aluminum may be harmful to plants and trees as well as animals in the flora.
Now, it is said that nitrogen is definitely one of the key components of keeping flora healthy. However, as everything too much or too little in this world is not good, so is the nitrogen to the flora. Because of the nitrogen cycle, When there is too much nitrogen in the soil, plants grow spindly and have fragile stems. The weak stems become less able to support the plants, while the foliage continues to grow abundantly. Root development is also hindered, resulting in even less plant support. Therefore, the plants eventually die since it can no longer sustain itself. Additionally, when there is insufficient nitrogen in the ecosystem due to the nitrogen cycle, it causes nitrogen deficiency in plants. Plants with a nitrogen deficiency usually have limited growth, which varies depending on the degree of the lack. The leaves begin to wilt and dry up, acquiring a yellowish brown to brown color, which in the end can cause plants to die.
We now know that biogeochemical cycles are not only crucial to plants, but they may be also harmful. However, not only these cycles have an impact on the flora, but there is also a group that causes harm to flora, which we call the invasive species.
An invasive species is a non-native creature that poses ecological or economic damage in a new habitat. It can degrade an ecosystem's natural resources while also posing a hazard to human usage of those resources. It also can extirpate wildlife and ecosystems, reduce biodiversity, compete for limited resources with native creatures, and modify environments. While on the topic, some people say that humans are an invasive species due to some characteristics being fitting the criteria of what you call invasive. But according to published content, they are not. Though at this point, the topic is debatable, and most argue that humans are indeed an invasive species.
Like us humans, plants also are evolving as they adapt to their new surroundings. Let us know how flora started to adapt to these things.
Plants need to function by relying on epigenetic mechanisms, which is the study of heritable changes in gene function, and are mitotically or meiotically heritable. Flora species that have developed a bacteria to adapt and shift into usable nitrogen. Plants also adapted to form nodes to accommodate bacteria and convert it to nitrogen. If natural or sulfur reserves have a deficiency due to invasive species, plants would evolve to boost sulfur uptake, which increases their ability to take sulfur from the soil and release it, and transfer it to break down the sulfur-rich defense chemicals to recycle the sulfur they contain.
Humans, on the other hand, rely on plants as their source of both nitrogen and sulfur. Other than the artificial means such as medicine or dietary tablets that provide these two crucial minerals, we mainly absorb nitrogen and sulfur through ingesting plants rich in either of these minerals. Like how plants have evolved to use bacteria as a means of absorbing nitrogen, we humans have what we call gut microbiota in our digestive tract that help with digesting different types of fibers. This also means that they help with the digestion of both nitrogen and sulfur alike.
In the end, we may not be considered as invasive species, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't help flora flourish. The next generation depends on us, and we have the duty to fulfill, to secure their future. For this episode of What E.A.F, I challenge you to do something to make the Earth a better place. May I ask you, are you up for the challenge?